This video will focus on English Language Unit 1 fiction paper. It's appropriate for both foundation and higher tier candidates. Unit 1 is a fiction paper, and the first thing that you need to do when you get that paper is number 1, to turn straight to the questions and to look at the questions focus. So if we look at the question focus here, it says read lines 1 to 34. So that's the next thing that you do. So look at the lines that have been identified in the question. And in this case, those lines are 1 to 34. The next thing that we do is to look at the questions focus. And it says, what do you learn about Justo in these lines? Write about facts and details about him and the kind of person he is. So you need to read the question carefully and to highlight the keywords. And in this case, we're focusing on Justo. And there are two things that we need to focus on in terms of the bullet points. The bullet points are there to guide and support you. So it's asking about the facts about him, the details about him, and the kind of person he is. You will also note the marks that are available for this particular question. And in this case, there are 10 marks available. The actual paper itself, you would need to spend 15 minutes per question. And it's very important with timing that if you get to 15 minutes and you feel like you need more time, you should leave a space in your paper and move on to the next question. So your timing is a really important element of your examination technique. We're going to focus in detail now on this first question, question A1. So we've already established that you focus very carefully on the line references. You would need to perhaps in your exam get a highlighter pen and just highlight the section that you're focusing on, because you need to note that if you do comment on any other space outside lines 1 to 34, you're not going to be awarded any marks. So it's very important that you do focus on just that section. And the A1 question is, what do you learn about Justo in these lines? He is your focus, so you need to make sure that with your highlighter pen, you focus on Justo. The next thing to note are the bullet points. So it says, write about facts and details about him and the kind of person he is. So, in terms of the bullet points, the first one wants a simple search and find. It's what we call a location element to the question. So you're finding the facts and the details. The second bullet point advises you to show understanding of his character, and that's what we call an inference question. In order to gain high marks on this first question, you need to make sure that you address both elements of this particular question. So now that you know what you should be focusing on in lines 1 to 34, having read the question, we then turn to the comprehension. So this is a fiction comprehension. When you look at it, you will note that you have information italicised at the top of this comprehension. It says, read carefully the passage below, then answer all the questions. The next part says, this passage is about Justo Anstrutegi. He is a young man of 18 who has inherited his family farm near the town of Guernica in Spain. So it is important that you read that contextual information, because it makes, it gives you more understanding of what you're about to read. So let's look at the first part of this comprehension. Justo Anstrutegi reputation rose uphill to the village of Lumo. There, Maria Onati heard that he was a defender of causes and a wit, although some suggested he was too eager to create his own mythology. Most often, she'd heard that he was the one to watch during the strength events on feast days. One friend claimed that he'd carried an ox into town across his shoulder and celebrated the feat by throwing the beast across the river. Yes, said Justo, when asked about the story, but it was only a small ox and downhill most of the way into town. The important thing is that you always track through. There's a reason why a comprehension will start at a particular place and why it finishes at a particular place. And so for that reason, you must make sure that you track through the text. Almost as if you've got your finger on the page, you're tracking through and then highlighting any information that you feel is important. So let's have a look at it. We'll focus first of all on this word reputation. That suggests that Justo is actually really quite well known. We also learn that he's a wit, perhaps too eager, and we have this reference to his own mythology. So there's perhaps an indication there of this sense of arrogance. Perhaps Justo is an arrogant character. This is juxtaposed to some extent in the next phrase that we highlight, which is, but it was only a small ox. So perhaps this makes a suggestion that he is humble or has some kind of false modesty. One thing you need to be aware of is that WJC are very likely to choose a text that indicates some kind of change within it. And here is evidence. We're weighing up the facts. Is Justo arrogant, or is he actually quite humble, or is he both? What we're going to do now is have a look at some exemplars of how to answer this first A1 question. And when you look at this example, you can see that it's colour-coded. So any blue text highlights the temporal markers that show the examiner that you're tracking the extract logically. The green text highlights the direct quotations of pieces of information that are taken from the text. The red text is evidence of inference and understanding. Remember that first part of the bullet point, and that shows that you've engaged with the question and the text. And the purple text is giving this summative statement or the overview, but you should note that that's not always needed. Okay, so let's have a look at an example. At first, the writer tells us that Justo has a reputation. Note that this particular student has started with at first, so they're picking up on this change within the comprehension. And we've also got these lovely one-word quotations with reputation. A one-word quotation is something that the examiners look for because it shows a close reading of the text. Okay, so Justo has a reputation across the villages, which suggests that he is well known in the area. You really need to get this word suggests after you've quoted. He is said to be a wit, again, a one-word quotation, hinting at a sense of humour. We are also told that he is a defender of causes, suggesting that he sticks up for others. At the end of the first paragraph, now we've used that lovely phrase there at the end of the first paragraph, and the reason why you've used it is, remember, you're indicating to the examiner that you're tracking through. So we can see this in the blue, at first, at the end of the first paragraph, and next. And these are markers to your examiner to show that you're doing this tracking. Okay, he's described as one to watch in the strength events, showing that he has a great physical power. Now remember that the green indicates this ability to use inference. So Justo had a reputation, he's said to be a wit, he's a defender of causes. Okay, so we have these direct quotations, and then the red is indicating here what you learn about that information. So what do you learn about Justo based on this information? And remember that from the bullet points from that first question, we were focusing on what do we learn about him. Okay, remember those two parts of that first bullet point. The facts and details, and then the kind of person he is. What you should do now at home is to read through the rest of the extract, and you can, I'll put this particular paper onto the shared area so that you can access it quite easily at home. And what you should do is spend 10 minutes tracking through the rest of the extract and identify as many points as you can to complete the answer. And what you should do in terms of your technique is to follow the pattern that you can see above. So you've got your indication to the examiner in blue that you're tracking through. You've got in green your direct quotations to support your ideas, and the red which shows that you're making inference about the kind of person that Justo is. So let's have a look at the way that the examiners are going to mark this particular question. When they have your examination scripts, they mark in terms of bands, okay? So if we look at the first one, we've got to give 1 mark. You'd be unlikely to get 1 mark, because to get 1 mark, you have to have unsupported assertions, just simple comments, and copying really from the text. So not really saying a lot about it, but just having lots of text copied out. For 2 to 4 marks, which still is not a pass, you've got simple comments, which are just based on the surface features. So it's very obvious the things that you're writing about. And, you know, your references to the text is limited in terms of inference. So perhaps you are quoting, but you're not really saying a great deal about, not making many comments about the things that you've picked out. If we then look at marks 5 to 7, so this is moving from C at 5 up to grade B with 7. So in order to get into this band, which you certainly want to be here, is that you need to select appropriate detail from the text. You need to show an engagement with the character, an understanding of the character, and the inferences that you make, when you're explaining what you think Justo is like, the kind of person that he is, are valid inferences. So you don't make wild sort of inferences about Justo, but they're very much rooted in the text. In order to get into 8 to 10, which is your A to A star, you have to explore the appropriate detail from the text with depth and insight. Your answer needs to be very thorough. Lots of evidence of this tracking. Remember those discourse markers. You need to be perceptive. You need to also cover a range of points accurately. You wouldn't want to just write about the very first paragraph of that comprehension. You'd want to make sure, because you're focusing on lines 1 to 34, you would need to make sure that you focus on the first section, but you also make comments from the middle and towards the end. You need to make sure that your points are accurate, that they have an assured grasp of character, and your inferences are assured, so you're very confident in your writing. Remember that just finding the facts in the text is not really enough. You need to show evidence of your understanding, and you also need to give an overview in order to get into those higher grades. So what sort of things should you have picked up on when you tried this yourselves? You would have focused on Justo's reputation, how it's spread to other villages. You might have picked up that people say that he's a defender of causes, he can stick up for himself or others. We also might say that he also has a wit. Perhaps he's too eager to create his own mythology. You may have commented that he was one to watch in the strength events. He's clearly very strong, whether or not the ox story is true. He jokes about the ox story. We also learned that he's the largest man in the competition. We also learn that he goes barefoot in the wood chopping because he only has 1 pair of boots. We know that he's lost a toe. We know that he can't afford new boots. He's much better than anyone else at the wood chopping. He's less impressive at wine drinking. He is formidably strong in the farmer's walk. He plays out a false drama for the crowd, and he also acknowledges his admirers. So in terms of the overview, what could you comment on? Well, he's well known. He's immensely strong. He has a sense of humour. He's a practical joker. He's humble and perhaps quite modest. Remember that I've already said that this particular question should not be just simply listing and reeling off the facts and information, because you do also need to show an engagement with the text and also an understanding of the character. So let's look at this exemplar that we have here. In lines 1 to 34, we learn that Justo was a defender of causes and a wit, as this is what is said Maria heard about him. This is written, by the way, just exactly as it is with the candidate. In lines 1 to 34, we also learn that some people said that he was too eager to create his own mythology. In lines 1 to 34, we learn that Justo was one to watch during the strength events on feast days. Also that he carried an ox into town across his shoulders. and then also celebrated the feast day by throwing the beast across the river. In lines 1 to 34, we learn that Justo is a very modest person because he says, "But it was only a small ox and downhill most of the way into town." So all the way through this particular exemplar that you have here, you just have surface inference, if you like, and picking up on quotations. It's not really going into the inference or showing understanding of the character. So it's important that you note that this particular answer, even though you've got quotations from the text, and even though it's making reference to the correct lines, it's not going to get into that C grade, okay? Because you've just got this surface references with the simple references to text, okay? So we're going to look at another response. At the beginning of the extract, we learned that Justo has a high reputation in the village of Lumo. He is said to be a defender of causes. However, some say he is eager to create his own mythology. In other words, he is perhaps prone to making up false stories about himself. It seems that other people may be jealous of him. Justo is a strong man, as he is one to watch during strength events. It is claimed that he carried an ox into town and threw it across a river. However, he is a modest man and claims it was only a small ox. Justo is the largest man in his competition. We learn that he is an entertaining and happy character, as he joked with the crowd. We learn that he may be a little foolhardy, as he goes barefoot in the axe competition. Justo says that he's proud that he still has 9 toes, and seems a brave and almost comical character. We learn that he is poor, because he only has the 1 pair of boots. Justo splits the log before any of the other competitors, so we learn he is the strongest man. At the wine drinking event, however, he is less impressive. However, at the farmer's walk contest, he is unmatched, so we learn that he possesses great strength and endurance. He creates false drama when first lifting the weights, so we learn that he has a showman-like personality. Justo nods to the little ones, so we learn that he is a caring kind of person. He also shows the child an illusion in which his arms appear to grow in length, so we learn he's a joking and fun type of person. The reason why this is a more successful response is for a number of reasons. Firstly, we have the discourse marker, which indicates that we are at the beginning of the extract. We also have these embedded quotations that are, forming part of the answer. We also have references to our impression of Justo, what we learn about him, what kind of person he is. This particular candidate has been clever in the way that they continually make reference to learn. So we learn that he is an entertaining and happy character. We learn that he may be a little foolhardy. Okay, and then towards the end as well, so we learn he's a joking and fun type of person. Now, the reason why that's a clever technique is because you're repeating some of the words and phrases from the question. And you're showing to the examiner that you're tracking through, and by using that phrase, we learn, you're really sort of focused on that question. The A2 question is a lot trickier, okay? And this was a question that some candidates in the past have struggled with. So again, the first thing that you're doing is to focus on the section that you're given. Really important that you just stay within that section, because if you work outside of that section, then you're not going to be awarded any marks. And in this case, we can see that we're focusing on lines 35 to 64. If you have a look at the question, one of the first things that you're doing is to highlight the key information in the text. So let's look here. What does Maria think and feel about Justo in these lines? How does the writer show her thoughts and feelings? So the first thing that you need to do is to recognise what the focus of the question is. So we're focusing on Maria, and we're focusing on how she thinks and how she feels. And you need to make sure that you look at both sides of that. Okay, so what she says and what she does, and what it suggests about her thoughts and feelings. You then need to focus on Justo, because that's Maria's, she's thinking about what she thinks and feels about Justo. So it's important that you convey that as well and you understand that part of the question. So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, how does the writer show her thoughts and feelings? So it's a two-part question. Every time you identify something she thinks and feels, try to show how that thought or that feeling is conveyed or shown by the writer. So let's have a look at the section. It starts on this slide. It so happened that just as Justo completed his walk, Maria discovered the need to visit friends near the finishing line. And who could have imagined that just as Justo walked past, a friend would say something so amusing that Maria unleashed her most feminine laugh. Okay, so right from the very beginning, it so happened. The writer here is hinting that in fact Maria has an interest in Justo. The reason why we know this is because just on from that phrase we have Maria discovered the need. So it's clear that Maria is creating situations to bump into Justo. If we continue looking at this section, and because he was so amusing, it was natural that she would be smiling her broadest smile when he looked her way. Okay, Justo glanced at her and walked on. This must be the most arrogant man in Guernica, she thought. Okay, so she's clearly angered by his lack of interest in her, but this makes her somehow all the more determined. Behind the scenes, Maria quickly arranged to present the prize, a lamb, to the winner. "Congratulations," he said to Justo. She handed him the lamb and moved in for the ceremonial kiss on his cheek. "Thank you," Justo said and announced to the crowd, "I'm going to fill the valley with my flock from winning these events." Justo waved and accepted congratulations as he walked through the crowd, and Maria skirted the gathering so that he would have to pass her again. "Would you like to dance?" she asked. Justo stopped. He looked at himself in his dirty overalls. He looked back at her. "Did somebody tell you to do this?" Justo asked. "No, I just thought you might like to dance, if you're not too worn out from all the chopping and lifting." But they didn't dance. They sat and talked. His sisters watched them. And on the walk home, they unanimously voted against her seeing this boy. She agreed he was not the most handsome man. He was frighteningly powerful, and despite his boasting in front of the crowd, he had been without confidence when they were alone. "He's homely," his sister said. "He has character," Maria argued. "He's ugly," a less generous sister offered. "He has his own farm," Maria's mother commented from behind the group of girls, and Maria looked thoughtful. Maria was almost 20, the eldest in the family of 6 girls. Her father had injured both legs in a fall at the farm, leaving him fixed to his wooden chair. Maria returned home in silence as her sisters debated Justo's many inadequacies. So let's have a look now on the next slide at the beginning of an answer to this particular question. You'll remember the techniques from the previous slide that you need to employ when you do your responses. Okay, so first of all we've got the purple that is giving that overview. We've got the blue that's indicating that you're tracking through the text. We have the red, which indicates this inference, which shows that you have understanding of the character. And the green, which is then used to select key information from your text, your quotations. What you should do now is look at this model and continue tracking through the rest of the extract. Give yourself 10 minutes to do that. And at the same time, identify as many points as you can to complete the answer. And try to use that model where you have these 4 separate aspects to your answer. If we look at the mark scheme, in order to gain just 1 mark, you would have to make very simple comments where you're copying information and selectively. To move into the 2 to 4 marks, which is still below the grade C, you're making simple comments based on the surface features of the text. You may show limited development. Your answers, if you're below the C grade, may be thin or perhaps are unselective in their textual material, or use unsupported or inappropriate spotting of devices. Better answers, moving more towards the C grade, will attempt to address the issue of how. If you're securely in the C grade, so mark 5 to 7, then you make valid comments, appropriate selection of textual material. Your answers will probably rely on spotting factual content. But moving towards 7, which is more towards the B grade, you will show some awareness of the issue of how. Moving into the final band, the marks 8 to 10, which is the AA star, you select and explore appropriate material from the text. You show insight into the author's method and use of language. For that A star, answers should have clarity and coherence and will show insight. The most important thing to remember with this A2 question is that you should spend some of your time focusing on how, so remembering the writer's technique. We're going to look at now the things that you perhaps could have picked up on. We know that Maria is interested in and attracted to Justo. She engineers several situations to meet him. She uses her feminine tricks to attract his attention. She discovers a need to visit friends near the finishing line. You may also pick up that she unleashes her most feminine laughter just as he walks past. She smiles her broadest smile just as he looks her way. When he almost ignores her, she thinks Justo is the most arrogant man in Guernica, and she feels even more determined to attract his attention. She works behind the scenes to present the prize to him. She moves him for a ceremonial kiss, and she deliberately skirts the crowd so that he will have to pass her again. She also asks him to dance, so she takes the initiative, and she does agree that he's not handsome. So if we're focusing then on the how, she thinks he's boastful but without confidence with girls. She is still interested in him. She defends him against the criticism of her sisters. He has character. She is thoughtful when her mother observes that Justo has his own farm. And the writer does point out that she has incentives to marry. So she's the eldest of 6 girls, and her father is injured and fixed to his wooden chair. She is also silent as her sisters discuss Justo's many inadequacies. The writer uses Maria's actions and her thoughts and dialogue. There is also interaction with Justo, but also with her sisters and mother. And we could suggest that there's an almost ironic, knowing tone. It so happened, who could have imagined? And the language choices such as moved in and unleashed. So what we're going to do now is to have a look at a higher tier Unit 1 sample answer. So during these lines, it is shown that Maria has a crush on Justo. This is shown in the line, Maria discovered the need to visit friends near the finishing line. This shows that Maria has discovered the thrill of meeting Justo at the finishing line and has realised that her affection is growing stronger. But this then switches to Maria believing that Justo is arrogant due to the fact that Justo just glanced at her and walked on. This offends Maria as it makes her feel that Justo doesn't have the same feelings as her. It is then shown that her affection for him is still strong as she moved into the ceremonial kiss on the cheek, and as Justo says thank you, it confirms her affection for him and shows their mutual feelings. Maria then presents a flirtatious manner towards Justo as she skirted the gathering so that he would have to pass her again, and asks him to dance. What we can see all the way through this example is that we have these inferences. We also have the references to the text with these nice quotations. We've also got the use of the words such as this is shown in the quotation. This shows that Maria had a strong affection. So this is shown in the quotation as picking up on the how. And it's also a good idea to use this shows, this suggests. That is language that you should be using throughout your answer. This next sample answer is much shorter, you'll notice, than the previous one, and perhaps less successful. There are references to the text, but it's not going into too much detail. We have got the this shows, but it's perhaps picking up on this surface meaning. And there isn't a great deal, if you look at this example, that's really focusing on the how. If you turn to the start of the Unit 1 sample answer 5, which unfortunately is also on this slide, although would like it to be on the next slide, if I start off just by looking at this, Maria clearly likes and fancies Justo in these lines. The writer shows that when Maria felt the need to go to the finishing line, as Justo completed his walk. She also unleashed her most feminine laugh and gave her broadest smile. Straight away, when you look at the beginning of that example, you've got these sharp, short quotations, and they're embedded quotations. Embedded quotations is where it's forming part of the sentence. As this example goes on, if we go down to the second paragraph here, she thinks that he must be the most arrogant man in Guernica when he does not react, so the writer shows how she's upset that he does not seem to like her back. She keeps using excuses to get close to him, showing that she still likes him, such as handing him the lamb. The writer shows that she feels attracted to him because she arranged things so she could kiss him on the cheek. She also walks so that he would have to pass her again, implying that she likes him a lot and wants to talk to him. The writer shows that she feels attracted to him when she asks, "Would you like to dance?" showing how she thinks that she likes him. When they sat and talked, the writer shows how Maria felt close to him and allowed them to get close to each other and get on well. She thinks he was not the most handsome man, and he was frighteningly powerful. She also thinks that her first impressions that he was arrogant were wrong, as he was without confidence when they were alone. The writer also shows how she thinks he's nice when he argued with her sisters to defend him. She clearly likes his personality, as she says he has character, and she's clearly thinking about whether to see him again as she returned home in silence. The reason why this is a very good answer is because we have the use of the writer. We also have the focus on shows. We've got the short quotations, and it's very much tracking through the text as well. We have this nice overview at the end, and quite reflective as well, as she comments, or he comments, she is clearly thinking about whether to see him again as she returned home in silence. So we've had all the reasons why this particular candidate has thought that, and then it's summarised in that very final paragraph. So it's a very good technique that's displayed in this particular answer. The next thing you have to do in the A3 question is to mark out the section that you're focusing on. You can't see it very well on this slide, but it's lines 65 to 87. Then if you look at the A3 question, it's actually in 2 points. What happens in these lines, and how do you react to what happens? So what you need to think about is look at the events that have taken place, and then you need to make a personal comment about what that suggests to you. You need to think about, interlinking the 2 points, and you really mustn't retell the story. So if we look at this section, again, there's 10 marks available. What you also must be very careful to do is, because you're spending 15 minutes on each question, so you must make sure that you leave yourselves 15 minutes to tackle this A3 question, because if you miss it out, then you're missing out on whole grade differences. So if you just have a look at the bottom of this slide here, where it says, others interested in Maria presented flowers or sweets when they arrived at her home. Justo arrived empty-handed, but wearing his work clothes. He gave her mother a vigorous handshake, patted the father on his shoulder, and asked a question that instantly won over Mrs. Onati and the sisters. So again, you've got your highlighter pen. You'll notice that we've highlighted in that second line. So for the examiner, you're showing that you understand why that particular section has been marked off. The fact that he arrives empty-handed, he doesn't bring any present, which might seem unromantic. We also think that he's quite awkward, and perhaps initially think he hasn't made the effort because he's wearing his work clothes. He also gives an instant, sort of slightly comical greeting, but he patted the father on his shoulder and asked a question, so he's instantly won her parents over. The other moment that you might want to pick out is where he then goes on to obviously help them, and this line here where it says, "Whatever is hardest for you ladies." So immediately he's offered help, with the work and shows that he's thoughtful and actually, quite clever. So if we have a look again at an answer to the A3 question, if you have a model of writing, at the beginning of this extract, Justo visits Maria at home. He arrived empty-handed and wearing his work clothes. So what we've done again in the section that's highlighted in blue, we have this indication to the examiner that you're tracking the extract. So at the beginning of this extract. And what we also have is the use of embedded quotations. I always think there are 3 types of quotation use. The first type, and if you're AA star candidate, they need to have those one-word quotations, the references to the texts, and also the embedded quotations. So moving on to this model for A3, it says, makes me feel as if he is rather unromantic and awkward and does not know how to impress her. So don't be afraid in that A3 question, because it's asked you, how does it make you feel? Don't be afraid of writing, it makes me feel. You must be very important, it is important as well to show that you've engaged with the text. If you really haven't enjoyed reading the comprehension, you don't particularly like the characters, please don't write that in your exam. Make sure you show that you've engaged with these characters, because that shows an understanding of the text. Justo greets Maria's mother with a vigorous handshake and her father with a pat, which I feel is rather clumsy and comical. However, he then offers to help with the hardest work, and the women are instantly won over, suggesting that. What you may also notice with the comprehension questions is more often than not, especially on higher tier, there is often a change. So look for that change. It might start off where you think a character is one, you have a certain impression of a character, and perhaps as you read through the extract, that impression may change. And we can see here with this model that we've highlighted the change. We have again this use of indicating to the examiner that you're still on track. So, however, he then offers to help with the hardest work. We've got these quotations use, and then the inference and the understanding. Remember that it's 2 parts of the question, and you have to give your response. So what I suggest that you do now is look at the A3 question and have a go at writing for 10 minutes, tracking through the rest of the extract, and try to identify as many points as you can to complete the example. And use this particular model as an opening. Try to get in the markers to the examiner, the references to the text, and also your personal response. And then if we're looking at the bandings, you shouldn't really have a mark of 1, but mark of 1 is simple comments with occasional reference to the text or copying unselectively. And we'll look at the other marking criteria on the next slide. So for 2 to 4 marks, which isn't the C grade, you've got simple comments based on the surface features of the text or just retelling the story. To move into grade C, which is a mark of 5, 6, are candidates who are beginning to select and comment on appropriate material. They show a clear understanding of what happens and begin to engage with that issue of the personal response, so I think that. Then moving into a mark of 8 and moving up to A and A star, you show a clear, detailed understanding of the text, and you also make a well-considered personal response. So after you've written now your response, which should have taken 10 minutes, use the following marking criteria to help you mark your own work. So if you think about what happens, Justo visits Maria's home. He doesn't bring any presents, and he's wearing his work clothes. He greets the parents, which is perhaps rather comical. He asks what he can do to help, which instantly wins over Mrs. Onati and her sisters. And in terms here of the personal response, at first he seems unromantic and awkward. His offer to do the hardest work is likely to win approval and respect, and he takes Maria's help for granted and tells her what to do. And the other things for the A3 question that you could have picked up, he offers to do work they find hard. He's very formal and polite. He tells Maria to help, he doesn't ask her. They eat a relaxed meal after work, and Justo is now part of the family. The sisters appear to have changed their mind about him. A month later, Maria's in the front row at another fair watching Justo. He leaves the contest and walks over to Maria. He holds both weights in one hand and takes a gold ring from his pocket. He asks the stunned Maria to marry him. She accepts and they kiss. He goes back to the contest but is disqualified. He shows he could win anyway. He apologises to Maria for not winning another lamb. So the things that you might comment on from a personal point of view, the way the sisters change their tune is amusing, but also fair enough. It is perhaps a surprise when he leaves the farmer's walk to propose. He's rather blunt. His disqualification is an outrage. It is good when he shows that he could have won. It's quite charming when he apologises. He's a big, rough lad, but quite sensitive in his way. So if we have a look at a beginning of an answer here, which is answer 6, in the line 65 to 87, Justo arrives at Maria's house for the first time empty-handed and with his work clothes on. We know this, as it says, Justo arrived empty-handed but with his work clothes on. This doesn't give a very good first impression to the family, and Maria's, although he may be intending to work as he says, but wearing his work clothes. This is perhaps something that we would call a plodding response. We've got the references to the lines, we've also got the references to the text, and we're doing inference as well. With this creates a very good first impression of the family. It's not really going to move up any higher than a grade C. It's a very sort of formulaic response, as we'll see as we go on to the next slide, but it does the job. So if we're carrying on from the previous response, we go to the paragraph 2. In lines 65 to 87, Justo, after introducing himself, asks the question to the family, "What can I do to help?" as he knows the father is incapable of doing any work. This gives off a very good impression and shows how helpful to the family Justo could be. This also shows that they shouldn't have judged him by how he looks. In lines 65 to 87, everyone sat down together for a relaxed meal, and it says everyone was feeling as if Justo was already part of the family. I react to this by thinking that by helping out the family, he's made them think differently. In lines 65 to 87, Justo, whilst in the farmer's walk contest, goes off the path and retrieved a gold ring from his trouser pocket, and then asked her to marry him. I react to this by thinking that Justo will now help Maria's family to live, and that Justo will live happily with Maria's family. So again, as we mentioned on the previous slide, we're making references to the lines so that we show the examiner that you're focusing on that particular section. We've got the quotation use. It's then discussed. And then towards the end, in those final 2 paragraphs here, we have the personal reaction. What impression you have of Justo based on the lines that you've read. So again, it's a plodding response. I would say get a mark of 4 or 5 for that reason. It's not particularly sophisticated, and we'll see another example in a moment that's perhaps doing a little bit more. So if you look at the section that's just cut off there, as I said, I do apologise that it is cut off. It's the way that the app is uploaded. Justo appears at the home of Maria empty-handed, but wearing work clothes. So I feel he isn't very romantic. He gives the mother a vigorous handshake and the father a pat. And this affectionate behaviour makes me think he's a nice man, and also confident and assured. The sisters and mother who previously disliked Justo are instantly won over, and this makes me feel happy, as Justo has previously been portrayed as a very nice man who has been subject to rather unfair judgment by Maria's family. He asks what he can do to help, which makes me feel as if he's kind and caring. He offers to do the hardest things, like wood cutting, which makes me think he's selfless. In this example, you immediately have the reader's impression of Justo. You can see that, so I feel, it's in that very first line. We also have it closely linked to the text, in those very short quotations on the first line. And there are also some inference, some indication of why this particular impression has been supposed by the reader. If you look at the final paragraph here, as the family eat dinner, he is described as already part of the family, and the sisters also approve of him and think he's a good catch. I feel relieved that Justo has finally won over the family. So that I feel relieved, that's what we mean when we talk about an engagement with the characters. This candidate has engaged with those characters, and they've almost gone on a journey with this particular character and feel relieved that he's won over the family. So you kind of feel sorry for Justo because of his awkwardness when he first meets Maria's family. This romantic gesture in front of the spectators redeems him in my eyes for his earlier and romantic behaviour, and this is really picking up on the change that we talked about on the previous slide. I feel a sense of surprise as this proposal is rather sudden. However, I also feel happy as the two kissed after she accepts his proposal. This is obviously a joyous event, and they are both very likeable. When the judge disqualifies Justo for walking outside the lines, I feel annoyed because this is mean and unnecessary. However, Justo isn't fazed and walks past the mark of the winner. He ends by apologising for not adding another lamb to the flock. Now this is where we talked about there are 3 different types of quotation use. Remember that with your English language, you're not analysing the language in the way that you would for literature, because you're getting the information down, you're supporting your ideas, you're using inference and your own opinion. But you can still use quotations, those embedded quotations, as they form part of your sentences. There is a final demonstration of his kind, modest and caring nature and makes me feel content as it is a happy ending. Now the question was asking you to focus on how, your impression, how it makes you feel. And we have this reference, which is a really good technique, where you refer in that very final sentence on each of the questions. You try again to refer back to the question, and it really shows that to the examiner that you're focused on that particular question. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is to really think about what would be your top tips for the comprehension section of the English Language Unit 1 reading section. So top tips, and this comes really from WJC. Section off the text using the line numbers. Make sure you've got a highlighter pen in the exam. These exams are for you, and so you use them. If you've got highlighter pens or you've got a pencil, just highlight the section that you should be focusing on. Decide what the question wants you to look for. It's very important that you spend just 30 seconds looking at that question and identifying what the question is asking you. What's the focus? Which characters should you be focusing on? And what is the skill that they want you to look at? Be aware of the number of marks available. That is often an indication of how long you should spend on a particular question. In the case of the reading section, it's 15 minutes per question. Use any bullet points given in the question. Now they're starting to take this off on the literature paper, but if you are given on the English language paper bullet points to help you, make sure that you use them, because they're often there not often, they are there for a reason, so make sure that you make use of them. The other thing is to track the relevant sections thoroughly and make sure that you use those key words and phrases to show the examiner that you're on track. So if we just continue focusing on some of these top tips for the comprehension section on the English Language Paper 1, Unit 1, highlight, underline keywords and phrases. So pick it up, pick the obvious, but also show clear understanding and inference. Don't feature spot for the how question. Okay, think about what the writer's doing and think about how that links to meaning as well. Use temporal markers in your answer to show the examiner that you're tracking. So at the beginning of this extract or in line 41, it mentions that. Label your answer as well very clearly. So label A1, A2, A3, and then when you move on to the writing section, that narrative writing, make sure that you label it section B as well.